Welcome back, students. In our previous lessons, we explored how historians piece together the stories of early humans using stones, bones, and leftover tools. Today, we enter a completely new phase of investigation. How do we learn about people who didn't just leave behind objects, but who also left behind words? And how do we understand a society that buried its secret deep underground? Our tools for this chapter are twofold. First, we have literature, specifically the Vedas. Second, we have archaeology in the form of those silent stone sentinels called megaliths. By the time we finish this session, you will see how words whispered 3,500 years ago and stones placed 3,000 years ago combined to paint a vivid picture of life, death, and social status in ancient India. Let us open the first book. Let us begin with the books. When we talk about the Vedas, we are talking about some of the oldest literary sources known to humanity. The word Veda simply means knowledge, and that knowledge is immense. Now, many of you might imagine this as one big dusty book, but it is actually a collection of collection of four distinct compilations, a library created over centuries. First and most importantly for our study today is the Rigveda. This is the grandparent of them all, the oldest, containing over 1,000 songs or hymns called Suktas. The language is not the Sanskrit you might hear in a modern chant. It is an older, more ancient cousin called Vedic Sanskrit. Next, we have Samaveda. Samaveda is the music sheet, taking those hymns and setting them to melodies to be sung by a priest. Third is Yajurveda, a Veda of rituals, sacrifices, contain prose formulas used during yajna ceremonies, guides ritual procedures. And finally, we have the Atharvaveda, which is quite different from the lofty prayers of Rigveda. This one deals with the nitty-gritty of daily life, containing charms of charms to cure a fever or spells to ensure a good harvest. It is a window into the everyday hopes and anxieties of ancient people. Keep these four names in mind because they represent different layers of that ancient knowledge system. Let us zoom in now on the most significant text for historians, the Rigveda. In terms of content, it contains over 1,000 hymns, and Sukta is a beautiful word that literally means well said. And who were they saying it to? Primarily to the gods and goddesses. Three chief gods get the most praise: Agni, the god of fire; Indra, the warrior god who brought rain and won battles; and Soma, a god associated with a special plant used in rituals. Now, here is the detail that might surprise you. The hymns aren't all just simple praise. Some are written as a dialogues. Imagine a conversation written as a poem between a sage and a flowing river. They were composed by sages, whom we call Rishis, and while most of the composers whose names we know were men, the text does include hymns attributed to a few women as well, which is a noteworthy detail for that era. Geographically, the Rigveda talks a lot about the Indus and its tributaries like the Bias and Satluj, and it mentions the now dry Saraswati river many times. But here is a clue for dating it. The Ganga and Yamuna are barely mentioned, just once or twice. This tells us the composers lived mostly to the northwest of the Ganga plains. But how did these survive 3,500 years if printing only came about recently? The answer is memory. This is the most crucial thing to understand. These hymns were struti, that which is heard. They were never meant to be read silently in a corner. Prior 10 students would sit together and the teacher would recite a single syllable over and over until the student had it locked in their brain with perfect pronunciation. It was passed down orally from teacher to student for centuries before anyone ever thought to write it down. In fact, it was written down only several centuries after it was first composed, and it was finally printed less than 200 years ago using a very old manuscript written on birch bark that was found in Kashmir. Let's take a very quick linguistic detour here. Have you ever wondered where Sanskrit came from and how it connects to the dozens of other languages spoken across India today? Sanskrit belongs to a massive group called the Indo-European family of languages. This is why the Sanskrit word mat sounds remarkably similar to the English word mother. They share the exact same ancient root. In India, this family includes languages like Hindi, Gujarati, Assamese, and Kashmiri. But remember, India is also home to entirely separate families, such as the Dravidian family, which includes Tamil and Telugu, the Tibeto-Burman family in the northeast, and Austroasiatic family in central India. Language itself is a kind of archaeological evidence that we speak every single day. And now, let us return to the Rigvedic society. So, if we read the Rigveda carefully, what kind of society do we see? It was a world revolving around cattle, battles, and people. Cattle and horses were not just animals, they were the true wealth, the currency of power. Horses were yoked to chariots and used in battles. And what did they fight over? The hymns are very clear about battles were fought to capture cattle, to capture land for grazing and growing barley, and to capture water, and yes, even to capture people. The prayers asked the gods, give us cattle, give us sons, and give us horses. They had assemblies where the community, called the Jana or Vish, would gather to discuss matters of war and peace. Now, let us look at the vocabulary describing people. The entire community was referred to as a Jana. And you see tribal names like Bharat Jana, which is where the name of our country comes from. Brahmins were the priests, Rajas were leaders. But do not picture mighty kings with stone palaces. These early Rajas did not have standing armies. They did not collect regular taxes, and interestingly, their sons did not automatically inherit their position. They were more like elected chiefs. The composer described themselves as Aryas, meaning the noble ones, while their opponents were called Dasas or Dasyus. And here is the critical linguistic shift. Students, over time, the word Dasa came to mean slave. This tells us that when battles were won, captured men and women were often put to work and treated as a property. Language evolves, and that evolution tells a story of conquest and social hierarchy. Now we shift our focus from the spoken word to the silent stone. As we move down into the Deccan Plateau and South India, we find a completely different kind of evidence. These are the megaliths. The word comes from Greek, mega meaning big, lithos meaning stone. But these are not just random rocks. They were carefully arranged by people to mark burial sites, beginning around 3000 years ago and continuing for many centuries. You can find them all over the Deccan, South India, and Northeast, and even Kashmir. Sometimes all you see on the surface is a circle of stones or a single large boulder standing upright. Think of this as an ancient signpost in a graveyard. Why would you need a signpost? Because these were often family burial sites. People would need to find the exact same spot years or even generations later to bury another member of the family. Underneath these surface markers, archaeologists often find a cyst, which is a stone lined underground burial chamber. And here is the one of the most fascinating architectural features, the porthole. This is a round hole cut into one of the side slabs of the underground chamber. It was the entrance used to slide the remains of family members inside at different points in time. It is literally a door to the world of the dead, kept accessible for the family. Let us go deeper underground metaphorically and look at what we would find inside one of these megaliths. On the surface level, we have those silent sentinels, the stone circles or boulders, which serves as a permanent address of the family. Underground, we find the chamber. We find the chamber, which is like a stone box buried in the earth. And now, for the most exciting part for the archaeologist, the inventory. What did people send with their dead into the afterlife? First, we find distinctive ceramics, particular type called black and red ware, which is a shiny black pottery with red interiors. Second, this is crucial. We find iron tools and weapons. We find heavy iron axes, daggers, and farming implements. Remember that in the Harappan cities we studied earlier, they used copper and bronze. The megalithic people had discovered iron, and that is the major technological leap. Third, we sometimes find skeletons of horses along with the iron equipment for riding them. This entire structure, with its porthole entrance, was not just a hole in the ground, it was a carefully engineered resting place designed for multiple visits for our generations. So, we have the books telling us about Rajas and Dasas. Now, do the burials and match this idea of hierarchy. Let us look at the specific site called Brahmagiri. Archaeologists operate on a simple logical assumption. The objects you find next to the skeleton likely belong to that person when they were alive. It is a reflection of their life. At Brahmagiri, the difference between graves is startling. When archaeologists uncovered one skeleton, they found a staggering inventory: 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and 1 conch shell. Imagine being buried with that kind of treasure. This person was clearly someone important, a chief perhaps, but right there at the exact same site, other skeletons had almost nothing. Maybe just a few simple, undecorated clay pots. This is direct physical proof of social differences. Some people were rich and some were poor, some were leaders and some were followers. The books told us about hierarchies of Arya and Dasa. The graves shows us the undeniable wealth gap. The stones are silent, but the grave goods loudly declare the differences in social status. The dead do not speak, but the things they are buried with tell us everything about the unequal world they lived in. Let us take one final fascinating case study from a site called Inamgaon. You should find this on your maps. It is located on the river Ghodh, a tributary of the Bhima. In present-day Maharashtra, this site was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago, which is a very long time. Usually, adults were buried in the ground, laid out straight with their heads facing in the north, and vessels containing food and water were placed beside them. But here is the anomaly. Archaeologists found a large 4-legged clay jar buried in the courtyard of 5-roomed house. House was special because it was right in the center of the settlement, and it had a granary, a storehouse for grain. Inside that massive clay jar was the skeleton of an important man placed in cross-legged position. What does this tell us? A unique burial vessel, a prime central location, a huge house, and control over grain storage. This man was almost certainly a chief or a very important leader of the community. And what did the people of Inamgao eat? The evidence shows they grew wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas, sesame. But they also ate a huge variety of animals and gathered wild fruits like bear and jamun. They even fished for turtle and crab. This was a diverse and active food culture, a mix of farming, herding, hunting, and gathering, all in one place. Now let us address a very practical question that often comes up when we look at these videos. When an archaeologist uncovers a skeleton at site like Inamgao or Brahmagiri, how on earth do they know if it was a man or a woman? How do they know the age? The bones themselves hold the clues. First, the easiest distinction is between a child and an adult. A child's skeleton is simply smaller, and the bones haven't fully fused. So right away, the archaeologist can tell the difference. Before puberty, however, you cannot reliably say whether a skeleton was a girl or a boy just from the bones alone. The real differentiation comes with adulthood. The most reliable marker is the hip or pelvic area. A woman's pelvis is generally wider and larger, which is an evolutionary adaptation to enable childbearing. This is the gold standard of skeleton identification. Now, in the past, historians sometimes relied on a shortcut, jewelry found with a skeleton. But is that reliable? Not really, because we know from historical records and arts that men also wore in ornaments. Kings wore heavy jewelry, priests wore beads, and warriors wore talks. So, while grave goods give us clues about status, they do not definitely tell us the sex. The bones themselves are more honest. Finally, let us look at the connection to ancient science. The Charaka Samhita is a famous medical text written by the physician Charaka roughly 2000 years ago, and he counted 360 bones in the human body. While modern anatomy says we have around 206, Charaka was not wrong. You are just counting differently, including teeth and cartilage. It shows us that even 2000 years ago, there was a deep systematic interest in understanding the human body. See the image. Before we wrap, let us quickly secure the vocabulary and the main points in our minds. Veda means knowledge, and the Rigveda is the oldest. A yajna is a sacrificial ritual. A raja was an early elected leader, not a hereditary king. Dasa, which originally meant opponent, evolved to mean slave. A cist is an underground stone box used for burial in Megalith. So students, what have we learned today? We have seen that history is not just found on paper, but in the earth and in the very sounds of ancient prayers. The Vedas, especially the Rigveda, provide a soundscape of a world centered on cattles, gods, and emerging social hierarchies, carefully preserved through the immense power of human memory. Meanwhile, the silent megaliths of the Deccan offer a physical, tangible map of inequality, showing us through gold beads, and clay pots exactly who was who in ancient society. And finally, sites like Inamgao remind us that ancient life was a complex tapestry of farming, hunting, and unique personal stories. By combining the book, which is the Vedas, and the burial, which are the megaliths, we get a three-dimensional view of our ancestors that neither could provide alone. Thank you.